Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
Welcome to Good Sex at NYU. I am joined today by my guest co-host, Bernadette Ker, Bernie, who is a friend of the pod. She's a therapist in private practice, but you will notice that she is a former guest on the podcast from episode 32 on season 1 and episode 26 on season 2. So welcome back to the podcast, Bernie.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Today I'm joined by Lourdes Castro, who teaches nutrition and food studies at NYU. She serves as the director of the NYU Food Lab at Steinhardt, which is a teaching kitchen and food and nutrition idea incubator, exploring solutions to food and sustainability issues. She's originally from Miami and is a registered dietitian with a background in culinary arts and is the author of an amazing cookbook called Simply Mexican, which was voted one of the 25 best cookbooks of 2009 by Food and Wine magazine and Latin Grilling. She's worked in hotel culinary industry and is now teaching and shaping future nutritional professionals. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm going to say is that it's 4 cookbooks.
4 cookbooks.
And the only reason I'm going
goodness.
to be a stickler about it is that when you write a book, it's like a child, and I can't not acknowledge my other children.
Absolutely. I apologize. I disregarded the other kids. I feel bad.
Just keeping us honest.
Please. I usually do ask if there's anything else. Is there anything else aside from that we missed?
No. You got it all. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Perfect. So today we're here to talk a little bit about nutrition and sexual health and how they're connected. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your journey to here. We've heard a little bit about it in your, bio there, but can you tell us how you came to this?
NYU is very much a part of my journey because it's really where I became an adult, a young adult. So I came from Miami, back in the 90s. We don't have to get too specific on the date. But it was very much a different world for me. And I came to study nutrition. And as I was always interested in the human body and in science. And nowadays we call it STEM. Back then, those were, it was just, you were either English or math kind of thing, right? And so I was very, I did well in that subject matter, and that's what I liked. And I thought nutrition would just kind of really delve into chemistry and physiology, which it did. But the food part really came up later, and it was very apparent. I didn't grow up in a food-first family. My mother, she's great. She's great qualities. She's not a good cook. Still really isn't. Makes great reservations. That's really her forte. And we also didn't grow up in that, everything revolved around the kitchen, which a lot of families do now. And so, food, it was cultural, it was sustenance, it was that sort of stuff, but it wasn't, I didn't have the skills, let's say. And so then when I graduated and was working as a clinical dietitian, I could talk nutrients with my clients or my patients, but I couldn't really connect the dots with the foods that they were eating. And that was a real big aha moment for me. And that's when I dove into, I got some culinary training and then really opened my eyes to the culinary world. And that began my kind of double professional life where I had one foot in the nutrition world, but I wasn't really talking about my culinary side because then I would seem as this indulgent dietitian. And then on the food side, I wasn't talking about nutrition because then you'd be branded as this, flavorless, healthy chef. So I just kept them separate and, cut to today, it's all starting to blend. And I think in a good way, the food world definitely talks about nutrition and the nutrition about food. Both need a little more work, if you will, in the sense that I feel there's just a lot of misconceptions out there from the nutrition side, and we could do better on the as the dietitians and learning more about food and how people really eat from a cultural perspective.
Yes. Yeah. That is incredible. That is amazing. I'm thinking about even, where you just talked about like from the cultural side of things. NYU is a very diverse space. We have students from all over. How has that come up just even in the students that are pursuing nutrition studies and what conversations that are kind of trending now compared to maybe when you first were in school, when you first started seeing a little bit of that merging?
That's such a great question, because I think if you walk through, I don't say the halls of NYU, but the streets of NYU, we do see a lot of different faces, a lot of, diverse looking faces. And the course that I teach is open university wide. So I do get a nice, cross section of what the university looks like. And there's definitely a lot of international students. So one thing I'll say about that is that in my lecture, I do teach, because we are accredited and we have to follow a certain curriculum. It is from the U.S. lens, a lot of what I'm teaching, but I'm trying to make it a little bit broader and talking about global trends, because ultimately it needs to, if you can't personalize it, especially food and nutrition, it's just white noise, right? You're not going to really take that and really understand it and be able to apply it. So that's one thing. But the other part, which you asked, which is really, really interesting, is that from a nutrition student perspective, there's more men. So that's a huge shift. We were very female, there was a lot of women kind of pursuing that, and now it's not balanced, but you're seeing more, which is very exciting to see young men wanting to understand this. And who knows what they may or may not be dietitians, but that's what they're majoring in. And then I do a lot of surveys in my classroom before each. So if we're talking about, let's say, poultry, I'll ask, do you prefer, just a little survey before they come into class, what's your favorite cut? Do you like the white, the breast, or the dark meat, or things like that, to kind of just spur up conversation. And one thing I've noticed is that there's more and more carnivores, or omnivores, let's call it, where there was a huge trend of restrictive eating, where it was gluten-free and vegan. And while that exists, and there's people who either from a gluten-free perspective need to do it for health reasons, or perhaps vegetarian or vegan for all sorts of reasons, I found at a time people were adopting that more from a restrictive perspective as opposed to other things. So I think there's more openness to try new foods and hopefully new flavors, from going back to the cultural question. Yeah.
I'm really kind of thinking about nutrition and the things that I was taught growing up, and I'm wondering how much that comes up in your class, because I know that I grew up with like the food pyramid. I know there's like the plate now. I mean, can you share with us a little bit more about like what are the current like recommendations for nutrition? Because I feel like sometimes I think I know, and I look at like Google, and I'm getting different things. I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit more about
Google. I mean, he needs to take my classes.
Okay. I agree. I would love to.
So, or she can, whoever it is, Google needs to take my class. The pyramid is kind of used a little bit, but the plate is what the USDA, the dietary guidelines, are using as a visual representation of the guidelines. And it's that plate. Many people might have seen it. If you haven't, imagine a plate like with compartments. So it's like a pie chart kind of thing, where like half the plate should be vegetables, fruits and vegetables, a quarter should be grains, and then the other quarter should be proteins. And they qualify it: lean proteins, whole grains, things like that. And I think from a top of funnel thing, it's fine. Where, whatever if you're planning a menu, or if you're, putting together a dish for yourself, more than half of it, or about half of it, should be fruits and vegetables, and then you can kind of ratio it out that way. But we don't eat in those compartments, right? We eat in a very different kind of way. So that's where nutrition education does need to be a bit more personalized. And so either because I'm working with someone, or if for my students, or even for yourself as a nice little check-in, there's 3 questions I feel everybody should ask themselves to see how their plate, or even how their diet, because we don't get healthy with one meal, and we don't gain or lose weight with one meal, right? So it's over time. The 3 questions are: what's your protein source, right? We should be consuming proteins from plants or animals, whatever that source is, but what's your protein source, and do you have it in that meal over the course, or maybe over the course of a day, right? The second question is, what's your fiber source? And that's the one that gets overlooked like crazy. Now there's protein everywhere. Funny, today I was in the Wall Street Journal this morning, there was an article on how there's this protein explosion with products, and there's these protein ice creams coming out and protein potato chips coming out, and it's everywhere, right? Because people have this healthy halo about it. But fiber is overlooked. So we really need to, and we're under consuming that for sure. So the second question is, what's your fiber source? Are you having enough fruits and vegetables? Are you having whole grains? Are you having beans? Whatever your source is. And then the third, and this goes back to this article in the Wall Street Journal, is how much of your food is processed or ultra processed? Because if you were eating fiber and protein, but it's all coming from ice cream and chips, then that's a problem, right? So how much of your food, how much are you relying on that? And listen, I have some processed food as well because I live in 2025 and I had to take the train and come here and you're on the go. So you need to rely on those things, but not an over-reliance on it.
Yeah. I just feel like I'm doing a good job. I just check.
Okay, good.
I mean, I definitely do eat some processed food, but I think I'm someone who is vegan. And so one of the first questions people always ask me, well, how do you get your protein? I'm like, well, that maybe isn't the right question that you should be asking me.
So how do you get your fiber?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I get a lot of fiber. I have a lot of fruits and veggies, and I eat a lot of, beans.
Yes.
So like, I get a lot of fiber. Exactly. I get a lot of protein too.
Yeah. And that's a great question in terms of your protein source. Plant proteins are as good as animal proteins. The only thing that a vegan or a vegetarian, more a vegan than a vegetarian, has to really worry about is, B12 if you're getting that. But in terms of a protein is that you're mixing. You're not just always eating the same protein source. You really need to have different, like your beans and have some grains, and your beans and have some fruits, or not fruits, but vegetables, and just mixing it up, because we all get into these ruts or these like habits. And sometimes it's seasonal, but sometimes it's beyond that. But as a vegan, you can't get too into that rut.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do take the vitamin B supplement, but I also think one of the things that becoming a vegan has done for me is really put me into this like nutritional information, like creative kind of cooking system. I think like I am really thoughtful about the various different sources. And I mean, I'm not good at it all the time, I'll be honest. Right. But I think like there's, I already had black beans this week. Like I need to switch it up. I did some, Chinese red beans. Like I was like, okay, like this is a source that I can do. Like, and so I try to like think about it. If I've already had this protein, what do I need? Even when I go out, I'm like, no, I've already had that. I need to think about something different. If I don't, I mean, there's also like, if I don't have any options and I have to go with what's there. But it's just like, let me be thoughtful about it. So I think like if folks can be a little bit more thoughtful about what they intake and not just go on, I just really want those French fries. Whatever.
Which could be vegan. And
absolutely could be vegan. Like people
unless they're fried in beef tallow, which
exactly. I'm not that like tell me what it's fried in, but
but I could testify to Danielle, what you're saying. You're doing great. It's like all the desserts you've introduced me to that are also just like sugar substitutes and things like that. It just helps when you feel excited about discovery versus what you were saying about restriction. Because when with trends, yes, like right now protein is like the big trend, or a few years ago it was like your macros and your macros and tracking all of that. One of the things is also like oils, as we're talking about like what we're frying in, so like seed oils and versus other oils. Maybe you just speak a little bit about
seed oils. Okay, we're gonna go there. All right.
Yes.
Okay, so in a nutshell, they're not the villains they're made out to be. Okay, now there are problems. Industrialized oils, what comes to mind is things like margarine, partially hydrogenated oils. Those produce trans fats, and we know that those are detrimental, or they lead to poor health outcomes. We should not, we should try to eliminate those from our diets. And there's a mandate that trans fats have to be out of our food supply. I don't know about that, but if that anyway. So there's that. But poor little canola oil or sunflower oil, or those oils that maybe we have in our homes in bottles that we use for neutral flavor and we use to cook. So those are fine. And I will say olive oil, in my view, is definitely king, because there's so much research that's been put behind that we know. We can say with confidence that olive oil is not only heart healthy, but it's definitely not going to be detrimental to our health. On the seed oil side, There aren't as many studies there. However, we do know that low rates or low amounts of saturated fat in our diet is good. Canola oil being the oil that has the lowest amount of that. It happens to come from a seed, but that's not necessarily problematic. The one thing we do want to make sure we do is seed oils, we don't want to heat them, or really any oil, to a really high temperature because there's things that happen from a chemical structure that can be problematic. And that just means you shouldn't be frying or deep frying in it. But you shouldn't rely on deep fried food anyway.
Right.
We don't have to lead a perfect life in terms of our diet. We just have to live a perfect enough life, So if you have fried food every once in a while, fine. But we shouldn't rely on it. And I think the people who are very anti-seed oil, which we're hearing a lot in the news, in what context are you consuming it? There's seed oils in a lot of ultra-processed foods. There's seed oils in fried foods. There's seed oils in the things that we should probably not be focused on anyway. And so, yes, guilty by association. But does that mean that if you're home and you rely on canola oil to do your stir fry or something, or sesame oil, which is so key to the Asian flavors that we know and love, or even tahini, which is a sesame seed. Like, those aren't problematic, and we shouldn't vilify them.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, the myths and the various different things that we think just because of the seed oils, we're thinking, oh, is this like good or bad? I also, heard in the news, just various different things about alcohol. Like sometimes we think about like, oh, I'm going to have that glass of red wine and it's doctor recommended, But so I'm curious like what your thoughts are, what like the science says about how alcohol impacts our nutrition and whether not to drink.
That's one of the questions seed oils and alcohol, two questions that I get asked about a lot lately. And I think the alcohol one comes from the Surgeon General's advisory that we restrict or stop consuming alcohol. I forget the actual wordage. And it was based on the fact that there's evidence to show that it could lead to higher incidences of I think 7 different types of cancer. Okay, so that's that.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of people who are going sober or sober curious, which I think is great. There's, it's fine. It's a choice. To your question, or how you posed the question, which was that we used to drink red wine thinking that there was some health benefit to it. Now, I think we all understand that there is no reason to consume alcohol if we don't want to, right? If we choose not to, there's no health benefit. You're not doing something or you're not what's the word I'm looking for? You're not doing something against your health if you're not consuming, right? So there's no reason to consume. But alcohol's been around for centuries and even, thousands of years. I do enjoy my glass of wine, right? But so then the question becomes, how do I drink it, or how does a person consume alcohol? Three questions again. Okay, how are you drinking it? Are you drinking it in community with others, or are you drinking it alone? Right? We know that being in community is as important to our health as what we eat, right? We know that from the blue zones, where people who are living in these communal environments are better off. And so alcohol does that. It brings us. You serve it as a meal. There's a ceremonial aspect. You're in community, and you're eating along with that alcohol. Which is the second question. Are you consuming it with a meal, or are you just binge drinking on the weekends? Two very different behaviors. You're going to have two very different outcomes. And then the third, and this is probably the most important, is your own, you have to look at your own family history. So removing the addiction issue, if you do have that, that takes you down a different path. But do you have longevity in your family? And so I look at, let's say, I met all my grandparents, luckily, and I met, how many? 4, I think, of my great-grandparents. So there is, to some degree, that longevity, and they, I'm of Cuban heritage, and they drank rum, and not a lot, but, they sipped it small. And so I'm like, all right, I can, my glass of wine with dinner, with my family isn't, and it brings me joy, right? So I'm going to be okay with that. I also don't smoke, and I look at all my other habits. So you have to put it in that context. And those 7 cancers that the report picked out or showed, it doesn't really, it's not something that any member of my family has had. So I feel comfortable with that.
For sure. And I think, whenever we hear studies, we're thinking causal versus correlation, right? And I think, we're not like breaking down these studies, even though we are getting these I guess, instructions of kind of maybe what to pursue, like even from a student level as a therapist, talking to students about like addiction, or even talking to them about like different things that are coming out even now around like weight, health management. I'm curious about even like microbiome, right? We're going to connect this to like nutrition and sex, but just building up on the health part of it. In how alcohol does affect that, but many other aspects also, including like country of origin or heritage or like food sources that you're used to. Please talk a little bit about like how that impacts health and in what ways we can improve gut health and the outcomes that it has for our health, longevity.
In terms of culture and our diet and what we should eat and what's healthy, the notion that, everybody should have kale and salmon is, in my view, preposterous. Because if I told my Cuban dad to have kale and salmon, he's like, no, I'd rather, like, it's not part of what we eat. But we do eat black beans and rice. And it has to, in his case, it has to be white rice. And he's like, I don't care. It's the brown rice, I'm just not doing it. And I'm not going to die on the hill to make him eat the brown rice. Right. He's eating the black beans. That's the hardest part. And it's fine. And you'll have avocado, more fiber. Like we look within what our table brings and what our pantry has, and there's plenty of healthy foods there. So that's where you talk more nutrients, and then you could hone in on the actual food. Oh, amazing. So I hope that's like the cultural part. Yes. And I'll tie it now to the microbiome. So the microbiome is this. So we have bacteria living within us, and we could think of ourselves as hollow creatures, which it's kind of interesting that we have this tube. We're like a donut, right? There's a donut hole in us, which is our digestive system, and within that digestive system, in our intestines, is our colon, and all this bacteria lives there. And the more different types of bacteria. So I'll just use little bugs as an example. So we have ladybugs and caterpillars and maybe beetles or something like that. The more variety of those little bugs, the better it is. And the amount of them, the higher the amount, the better it is too. Yes. Where do they come from? Well, when we're born, when we pass through the vaginal canal, that's our first introduction to this bacteria. C-section babies are, or used to be, at a disadvantage because they didn't pass through that canal and didn't get all of that bacteria, that healthy bacteria. Interestingly, what they're doing now is, if it is a C-section, they're swiping the mom's vagina and then smearing it over the baby's face so that they can benefit from that. So there's a nice little workaround, if you will. Yeah. So we start developing that microbiome within the first 3 years of our lives. It's really the most important. And so what are things that help contribute to that? If you're breastfed versus bottle fed, so I mentioned the delivery. If you have pets in the house, if you've been exposed to dirt, quite frankly, livestock, things outside your home. If you live in a multi-generational house, going back to cultural things, that's been shown because it's just different people bringing different bacteria, and I'll say it that way, as a germaphobe. So, I do not pass up a disinfectant wipe if it surrounds me. I will wipe everything down. But there is benefit to that, especially at a very young age. Yes. Some of the things that are counter to a healthy, thriving microbiome is overusing antibiotics. So we do overprescribe that quite a bit at least in our country. If we consume livestock that have been also given antibiotics, that goes into our system and it's been shown to potentially decrease have negative effect of our microbiome. And then the foods that we eat. So that's where we can get into the nutrition. We can help bump up the numbers by eating fiber-rich foods. Specifically fermentable fibers, which are soluble fibers. And I'm going to get kind of in the weeds here, but it's specifically things that are oats. Oats are great, beans and legumes, and then fruits and vegetables. Whole grains don't really have a lot, but it's fine. But that's how we feed our little garden, if you want to look at it that way. And then we can add to that garden by eating probiotic foods like yogurt, kimchi, miso, pickled items, things like that that we're bringing bacteria into our system. And all of that, what that does is it makes us healthier. And it does so by decreasing our inflammation, by increasing our immune system, by producing serotonin, which is going to make our moods better and it's going to make us happier, theoretically. Yeah. So all of that is combined.
Amazing. Well, I was born and raised in Kenya, and so even what you're talking about with foods that we see here compared to what I grew up with, like it was this jarring experience to try to find I guess, like foods that taste the same, but also kind of still give that nutritional value we're used to and enjoyment and community. And so sticking to the microbiome piece, but also how it helps with our health, right? We're talking about like sexual health here. And so even what you're saying about like what feeling good, in what ways does nutrition play a role in our sexual health?
Okay, so many ways. Well, first, if you feel good, it'll enhance the experience, right? So you don't want to feel bloated or weighed down, or maybe if it's too much alcohol, that can also, not help. One thing and I know you asked about food, but let me just shift it a little bit to health.
Okay.
One thing that we should be really, and this is at all ages, one thing we should really be focused on is circulation. Right? And so when you think of the circulatory system, the two things that are going to impact it is going to be hypertension, so high blood pressure, or type 2 diabetes. And those are both, I don't say diseases, but they're conditions that affect your circulatory system.
Okay.
Good good sexual function is dependent on good blood flow. Both arousal, performance, everything is good blood flow. And so from a nutrition perspective, eating a diet that helps with basically a heart healthy diet is going to be something that could help in that environment. Erectile dysfunction is, which is, inability to be aroused, is dependent, is the first sign. It's kind of like the canary in the coal mine from some sort of heart disease. So if a man comes into a doctor with that, they will immediately do lipid profiles and things to see what's going on from a cardiovascular perspective. So anything having to do with circulation and blood flow will affect that. And so then the diets that are good for your heart are going to be good for your sex.
So I'm thinking about like students who are pretty young, not necessarily having these checks, not necessarily thinking.
But here's the thing, because our food supply is what it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot younger and younger people are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and with hypertension. This is not the old man disease or the old lady disease or conditions. Let's say they're not diseases. This happens younger and younger, and so if you're not, so
attentive,
and just keep an eye out on that. But and we're young and our metabolisms are probably at the peak, and so we can get away with eating, crappy stuff. But it's like skincare. Like you got to start young because you want it to keep going. And I presume everybody wants to still have great sex when they get older. It starts young, and those good habits will build over time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I want to go back to is you talked about how in the gut that it produces serotonin. And I've also sort of heard that the gut and the brain sort of communicate to each other.
They do.
And so I'm wondering if you can maybe share a little bit more about how that can impact mood, because I think that also has an impact on our sexual health and our overall health. But I'm thinking of the serotonin and how that can.
Yeah. And so there is a nerve that connects our gut and our brain. It's a vagus nerve. And what influences that is that microbiome. It's all those bacteria, and they're creating and releasing those neurotransmitters. So if they're not doing their job, we're not getting those signals, and then we're maybe, a little, more melancholy, a little sadder. You might not be in the mood and that sort of thing. And so it all boils down. It's really, nutrition research is really, really boring at the end of the day, because the answer is always just eat your vegetables, which nobody wants to hear about. So give me that magic.
My mom has been trying to tell me that since I was a kid.
Like your grandparents said that. And it's like, really? That's all you have to do. And some beans too. Add some beans to the mix and we're good. And that's it.
I talk about a lot with my patients about that, right? Like, I mean, I don't know the exact statistic, but like around 80% of feel-good hormones are produced in the gut.
In the gut.
And also like our brain is our largest sex organ, right? And so thinking about in what ways are we connecting gut health to brain health, and then in connection, right? Like even the hormones that are generated to build connection with folks, it's connected to our food, which is going to help us in connection even in our sexual citizenship, which, we've talked about before. Another myth, though, that comes up a lot is around like aphrodisiacs and, not necessarily myths, but
Yeah.
Things that people try to use as like quick fixes maybe, or ways of transitioning towards physical intimacy. You talk a little bit about like foods that are helpful, as well as maybe things and maybe foods to avoid.
You know, it's I love what you said that I love that you said that the brain is the largest sex organ, right? Because it is a lot of stuff is what we're imagining, right? And what we have in our brain. Food is more than just nutrients and more than just nutrition. And you've mentioning a lot of your background and I've mentioned mine and you yourself as well. It's our culture. It's we connect with it. It's comforting. It could be terrifying sometimes, but it's comforting for the most time. It's pleasurable. And so sharing that with someone else is quite intimate, right? And so when you bring someone into your home and you're cooking with them, that's also quite an intimate experience. Yes. So you mentioned aphrodisiacs. I think chocolate comes to mind. Oysters come to mind. In Latin America, ceviche has that juice, which is called leche de tigre. That is said to give, virility to men. Who knows? And I say that because there is no clinical trial, to my knowledge, that any of this is true. But the placebo effect is for real. And between the placebo effect, maybe some playfulness, and just like that connection, and maybe you're introducing, let's say in your case, you would introduce, what's like something from your culture that's like I don't know, like a
I mean, there's something called like kachumbari, which is almost like a salsa that we use with a lot of meals. Okay. So we're very protein heavy. And so, of course, to balance it out, we have kachumbari all the time.
So imagine preparing that with like someone and then teaching that and then eating that. I mean, that, that's amazing.
It is. Yeah. Or even just teaching people about yourself, right? Yes. So all of this is about intimacy, right? Like into me, you get to see the things that I love, the things that I value, the things that I want to bring you into and share with you. Are there things that we want to be mindful of that could affect, let's say, things like circulation, or can affect what we're talking about just feeling comfortable in your own skin? What can affect even arousal? It can affect performance, anything like that.
Well, and just to add to that, I think like there are definitely some foods that I have like just sit really heavy, and I'm thinking like to have sex when you're really feeling heavy there, not probably the best place to be having sex. No, that's thinking about it, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's where it's like, you don't want to have Cheetos, don't have fried food, because I think like a heavy fried food laden thing, and I think also alcohol could have the opposite effect. It does help kind of loosen things up and help people kind of relax a little bit, but when you take it too far, it's definitely going to, when we talked about how it's serotonin and lifting our mood, alcohol is a depressant, and it'll just kind of, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like taper everything down. So I don't know if that's an obvious one, but I think using things that maybe over consuming, be it alcohol or food, foods that make you feel uncomfortable, and certainly things that might be just heavy in your gut.
Yeah, figuring that out for yourself. I think like I cannot have some Indian food. I love it so much.
Yeah,
like, I overindulge myself. So like knowing what that looks like for you, and like being able to like identify like these are things that are triggers for me that I shouldn't probably consume. And one of the things that I think you mentioned was the alcohol, and I recently talked to someone about this, in that alcohol can also really be something that we numb. And so it's like you numbing parts of yourself too. So that's one of the other like reasons why like maybe alcohol, maybe isn't the best. Like people often think of, I'm gonna, relax into things. But I think it can also like, I'm feeling a little numb. I'm not feeling all of my body.
Right. Taking it too far for sure. Like that's where even food, like taking everything too far could just take you where it'll be counterproductive for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Are there any other like common myths about food or nutrition that you feel like would be helpful for us to unpack?
From a sexual health perspective, we talked about aphrodisiacs, and and I really do think that the big one is that circulatory thing, and not glossing over that it's not the old man's disease or woman's disease. It's something that really is starting to affect younger and younger people because of the way that we're more sedentary. We're eating, fast foods, processed foods, things of that nature. And if you feel it's not, if your body doesn't feel right, it's not going to perform right.
And what about coffee? like you hear like mixed things about
caffeine
and like the nutritional value or not nutritional value. Like I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that.
Actually, I think coffee has been vindicated.
That I never know. Sometimes
Yes.
like, I don't know.
No, yes. Okay. And actually, caffeine. Well, caffeine free. If you need decaf coffee for whatever your reasons, then fine. But they do treat. I believe this. I think they in order to decaffeinate the coffee, it's treated in similar ways that the seeds are treated in order to create the oil. So if you're gonna follow. If you're going to use the same logic, then there's something with that. With decaf, it's a process to remove the caffeine, where there's naturally decaffeinated teas, for example. I would probably nudge someone towards that versus caffeine-free or decaffeinated coffee. But from a regular coffee perspective, I think there's actually some evidence to show, or some research to show that it's beneficial. Which makes my husband so happy because he's like a 5-cup guy a day, something ridiculous. That's too much, but he loves it, and I think it's from a all-cause mortality, that it increases your mortality. I'm not entirely sure what the mechanism is there, but there used to be, and I almost feel it goes back to that restrictive eating that we used to see a lot of, and it's like anything that's good for us, we should probably not have. And so when I started studying nutrition, it was all about what are we taking away? So it was fat-free, carb-free, gluten-free. Everything was like, and then we're just drinking air, like what are we going to eat? Like
water, that's it.
And even then, we have to, is it alkaline water? Is it, what kind of water is it? Yes. But now it's like, what are we eating? And we're eating, protein or things that we should be consuming. What are the good things to consume? Healthy fats, fiber-rich sources.
Yes.
And looking at it through that lens, which I think is a lot more helpful.
It is. Okay, so one thing just came to mind about like our students who maybe are navigating their first sexual encounters, who are getting curious about oral sex. I know a lot of myth about foods that can change how you taste or how you are experiencing oral sex. I don't know any research around that, but let's say things like pineapple have come up a lot of like, it might change how your body fluids taste. Yeah. Does that come up a lot? Have you ever heard of that?
I've actually never heard of that. Okay, so what I have heard is, for example, and this is true, like there's certain spices and certain aromatic vegetables like garlic. That will, let's say when you're sweating it does come through your pores, or like you get that aroma. So I don't know if the mechanism is the same. Okay. But perhaps. But I don't know.
I can also see like, this is, again, a little bit too much information, but like when you eat asparagus, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's something to that too.
Okay, but that one, I know that mechanism.
Okay.
And it goes through so there's a chemical within asparagus, and it's only asparagus that I believe that you get it in, that when you consume it and your body starts breaking it down, it turns into something else, and it goes through your bladder and then and so then that's where it comes out of your urine, and that's where you get that very strong scent. Okay. But if we're going to apply that same logic, I presume it could happen with pineapples and your own sexual organs. But I don't know. I don't know that. But yeah.
I'm also curious, and again, this has less to do with like the sexual health component that we're talking about, and maybe just more about various different cultures and communities. In the U.S., like we have a different like process to our food, I guess. I've heard that like if you go other places and you eat, like some people who are gluten-free can be fine in Europe, or who can, eat in different places. And I'm wondering if you have any like knowledge or content around that.
That's an interesting question, because I have even friends that'll say, that they don't have celiac disease, but they can't eat gluten in this country, and then they travel to, I don't know, France, and they eat baguettes every day. Yes. And so the one thing that needs to be clear is that we do have a global food supply. And there's a lot of, at least there used to be a lot of trade within that. And so wheat is grown, I think, mostly in China, Russia, and the EU. And so so it's this cluster or it's just like a mix of all of that. And there is, even in Europe, in Paris or whatever, in Italy with their pasta, there could be some makers and manufacturers and bakers and such that source very artisanal flours, and perhaps those are going to be different. But if you're looking at more of the industrialized breads so I imagine that when people are traveling, let's say to Paris, they're going to that little bakery. But if they lived in Paris, they'd go to the supermarket. Like that's the way life works, right? Like here we do the same thing. Like we don't always go, perhaps New York is a little bit different, but you might, choose differently depending on where you're at. And so, so in terms of traveling, and I'll even loop it to sexual again. You might have, you might be having more sex when you're on vacation because you're more relaxed, right? And so then you're able to eat more interesting things, and then you might feel better, and maybe you are sourcing out better quality things because you're going to that little place that's getting their artisanal flour that's not mass produced, and you're feeling better about it.
Yeah, I was just thinking like maybe it comes back to one of your, is it 4 initial questions where it talks about, maybe it was 3, how much is it processed?
Yeah.
Right. So maybe even that, because what I'm hearing is like, oh, that small little artisanal, maybe it's not super processed. But if you go to the grocery store, maybe the ultra processed bread or ultra processed.
So it's not gluten then in that point. It's some of the additives.
Okay.
And the gums and the stabilizers and that sort of stuff. And it may be that people are affected with that by those things, and that's fair. But then these are the kind of people that might not, they go to a restaurant and it's like, I can't have soy sauce, or I can't, and it's like, you probably could, because the issue for you isn't the gluten, it could be the additives in the bread. And so, then and the slippery slope there is that then you're starting to restrict a lot.
For sure.
And it can affect your, not just your lifestyle, but like how you participate in social activities and joy and friends, and maybe people don't invite you over because it's like, she's too complicated to cook for her, or, things like that.
For sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about that even for like students who, with crazy schedules, right? Like a little bit more access here in New York City than maybe where they might live, whether across the country or international students who are being introduced to new additives, who are being introduced to new preservatives, new, insecticides and things like that. What would you recommend, in juggling, the heavy schedule while still wanting to have more whole foods, less processed foods, but kind of quick hacks?
Yeah.
Because of limitations even like in a dorm versus, let's say, an apartment that has a kitchen.
Right. And I see that in my class, the lecture that I have has labs in our food lab where students are participating or hands-on cooking. They're participating in these hands-on cooking activities. And many of them, this is their only time to cook for that week because they live in a dorm without a kitchen, right? And so And I was in that space where when you come to New York City for the first time, and you may or may not have a kitchen, but even if you do, it's a kitchenette at best. These are not, and you have to share it with 4 or 5 people.
Yes.
And so you have to then buy all these ingredients, and even labels are different, and in some cases the language might be different. So they're not used to. They're navigating a lot.
Yeah.
So it might be easier to go to McDonald's or grab pizza. A slice of pizza. It's easy. It's cheap, and then that's how they're eating. Okay, so once, and there needs to just be a little bit of a moment where they're just getting used to their environment, all right? So once you've gotten used to your environment and your schedule and you know what's going on with that, I think New York City offers a couple of really good options. First, we do have a lot of food trucks, and I think food trucks are, I don't know, and the ones at least I've seen outside of Bopes, which there's a lot, they're not really offering deep fried foods. So it's like tacos or bowls of, I don't know, meats or like beans or whatever, burritos and things like that. And it seems, at least from my looking at them, that they're cooking them. They might be a little heavy-handed on maybe fats or like meaning oils or salt or things like that. But at least it feels like it's being prepared wholesomely, right? So you have food trucks, you have grocery stores like Whole Foods, for example, or even Trader Joe's. I don't know if Trader Joe's has pre-prepared things.
They do.
A little bit,
okay.
yeah.
So those are great hacks where you can get things, especially at Trader Joe's, that are more affordable, but they're not. It's not like that. You're relying on fast food too much. And then food halls would be the next best thing, which I think is also fun that you can explore the city with. That's going to take a little, maybe that's more of a weekend thing.
Yes.
But when you buy, and a great thing is just getting double portions and then keeping it if you have that refrigerator in your dorm, and then you can just, kind of eat off leftovers for a certain part of the week. That could help.
Yeah. Are there any other tips or information about any nutritional thing that you want to share with our audience before we answer?
Well, since this is an NYU community, of course, my course, which is Intro to Foods and Food Science, it's open university wide, and it's a popular one. So it's a large class, but we do parse them out into small groups in the labs, and there's hands-on cooking, which throughout the semester, which is really,
I
really
recommended
great.
it recently to a student.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then I do have social media. I'm not as active on Instagram, but I do have a Substack, which I write quite a bit on that.
Oh, that's great.
It's called Fed, F-E-D.
Okay.
Like get fed,
yeah.
you know? And under my name, Lourdes Castro. So yeah, and that's where it's a great, I try to just answer questions like today, like are seed oils bad? What's the deal with tallow? Or, we didn't really touch so much about it, but this whole concept of epigenetics, which is how your genes are expressed. So we all have our genetic makeup. But then we live our lives, and how we live our lives will affect how our genes are expressed. So a perfect example, and I used this in one of my articles, was Picasso, the artist who lived to 90 some odd as a chronic smoker and drank wine at morning, noon, and night, right? So by all accounts, he should have, maybe died much younger. Obviously, he had great genes behind him, but he also did other things that were good, which was he kept his mind active. He ate a lot of fish. He ate unprocessed foods. So it's not to say that I don't want it to seem like you can have the French fries if you drink the Diet Coke, kind of thing.
Right.
But, we don't have to live perfect lives.
Yeah.
We just have to try to live perfectly good ones.
Yes.
Yeah, or even like a balance.
Yes, or even like harmony, right? Of like, there's no like one thing here, then one thing on the other side to keep it even.
Yeah.
But just what you were talking about, like the mindfulness of it's not one meal that's going to make or break, but it's also not one meal that's going to reverse any bad pattern, but it's just the consistent lifestyle trends of, making healthy choices and just making choices that like your future self will thank you for.
And trust me, I'm of an age that I can say my current self looks back at my young self and thanks her for some of the things she did and some of the things she didn't do. So you will be older before you know it. Trust me. And you will thank God that you made some good choices, especially for your health.
Yeah, and I think like whenever I meet with students, my first thing is always to check in with them about their sleep and their eating. And I'm not necessarily, I think that sometimes students might look at me like I'm crazy. I'm here for like trauma. I'm here for anxiety. I was like, but let's talk about like, that's one of the first things to go is we stop eating because of stress or we're not eating properly. We're just eating ramen noodles. And like, again, one meal maybe, but like, let's have some balance. Let's add some veggies into those ramen. Right? Like, let's find a way to like work with what we have, but also like, let's start there because that's where our health overall, mental and physical, start.
For sure. Right. And we talked about how the gut talks to the brain. So
exactly. I bring that up sometimes. I think it's just so important to check on those basic things. So I thank you so much for being here.
This was so much fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yes,
thank you.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Ker, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Baini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellon, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.